is not. And it doesn't fit those categories. As I just told you, if you look at the Jews in Israel, 60% of them aren't what we consider white. So it doesn't fit. We're trying to overlay our American idea of race on another culture. And I think that's part where the difficulty comes in to understand.
And that's why Hitler and the National Socialists, the Nazis, also believed that people could be divided into races.
Mm-hmm. But and they called the Jews a race. Yeah,
that's correct. But when you look at the science, the classification of humanity, it's wrong to put people into categories of race. You know why? Because there's actually really only one race, and that's the human race. Can I get an amen, somebody?
Amen.
Loud applause.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Calvin, we kind of fall, and the whole thing with the Jewish people is pretty much what Dan said, and that's why I defer to him on that. When I hear about stuff like this, and this can go to other groups as well, it seems as though people fall easily, at least some people do, into stereotypes, because it's just easy to do that. And that other people manipulate that, that all Jews are a certain way, or all people of color are a certain way. And they fall easy into that. And part of the reason is they're just plain lazy. They don't look at, a Dan or another Jewish person as an individual who has unique qualities, positive and yes, sometimes negative on that. And, that's a big problem.
Indeed.
Yeah. And I thought about that with the Jew when he talks about that, because the Jewish people don't fall into that. Like, people are, of certain nationalities and they live in a certain country and all that, and, the Jewish people started off as, my understanding is a faith, and it kind of evolved from that. But obviously there's great diversity within the Jewish people, as we know. So. Mm-hmm.
Yep. I know in the neighborhood, well, I shouldn't say that I lived in Brooklyn, but, people in New York, we walk everywhere. We walk from, through one neighborhood into another neighborhood. And then you look around, you've traveled 35 blocks, let's say. And the Jews in the south part of Brooklyn called Hasidic Jews,
right,
have their own neighborhood, their own stores, their own economic system within their community. And they are identified by their clothing. They usually wear black suits, black fedoras, white shirts. And by doing that, from afar, that's a Jewish person. And they live with that badge of honor and pretty much dares anybody to mess with them. No one goes into their neighborhood and causes any problems, because unless they're dressed that way, they would stand out like a sore thumb. But I want to swing it a little bit away from that, because there's other forms of anti-Semitism as well that may not be racist, or maybe a little bit less so. Because in the past, there has been a lot of hatred against Jews, and it was often fueled by the Christian churches in Europe, the Islamic world. There's been times when Jews were persecuted. People turned against them, not because they belonged to another race, but because they did not believe in the right God. How do you, I know how it's done, but I guess the thinking that I have is, if we are going to live together and in harmony and peace, everyone should have the right to believe whatever religion or whatever God they want to, or not. Thoughts?
The first thing I think of when you say that to me is I've seen on Facebook, when somebody puts their religion on there, and somebody put it, albeit somewhat facetiously, my God is bigger than your God, and they're not. They're not.
You know, one thing that
We respect all gods and all peoples if they have that belief in that particular version of God.
right, and also for those that may not believe, you know what?
That
They
too.
have the right to. They have the
Absolutely.
right to
Absolutely.
that as well. So where do we go from here? How do we get a conversation going? How do we change people's minds from what the normal thought is about Jews to swing it to an environment where it's less racism and less hatred towards Jews? How do we make that connection? How do we open up eyes? You do know Jesse Jackson would have probably been president of the United States if he had not been in New York and made that controversial phrase about the Jewish people in New York. Does anybody remember that?
I remember it.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. He called New York Jaime Town, saying that New York was run by the Jews. And
Well,
from
that
there,
goes back to the whole conspiracy theory and the secret cabals and all those kind of things.
yeah,
I think one of the problems is the fact that most people don't. Okay, so we're a little under 2% of the population of America. We're 0.2% of the population of the world. So most people only know Jews from dead Jews, because in a lot of places where they used to exist, they're no longer there. You know, if you just look at how we celebrate things, even in the United States, we have a Black History Month and a Hispanic History Month, a Women's History Month. We have Holocaust Remembrance Day. So we only talk about the dead Jews. And then I think part of what happens is it skews things. So if we only talk about the Holocaust, which is an important educational point, because if you learn about that, you help stop genocides in other parts of the world. And that's really where that teaching can lead. You compare everything to it. So, well, maybe if they just killed a few Jews in a synagogue, that's not like the Holocaust, so it's not quite as bad. So it really, this awareness, this finding out, this understanding, you know, I mean, obviously the folks here are open to that. But as I said, conspiracy theories answer all your questions of any type. You know, if you look at, so there's a famous forgery by the Tsarist secret police called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that talks about the Jews having this group that controlled the entire world. And if you look at the QAnon conspiracy, it's basically a rewrite of that book. So here we are going all over again. He didn't say Jew, but that's what he meant.
mm-hmm.
And there's code words in there and everything else. And unfortunately, the beauty of the internet is we have all this information. The downfall is we can spread the lies just as much. And that affects Jews and Blacks and every other group that's being discriminated against. But I think it's really just an answer to your question is it's meeting, learning, and being open to another culture. Because I know that I happen to love learning about other cultures and other traditions. And that's probably ultimately what's going to happen. But, you know, education can only go so far, as we've seen in our recent political discussions. So I don't have an answer, but these are some of the ideas that I would throw out.
Well, I think as long as the discussions are taking place and that education is being made, we're moving the needle in the right direction. It's going to take a lot of time. And this is something we're talking about hundreds of years or more of this type of hatred going on towards a certain group of people. So it's going to take a long time to get people out of that mold. Especially, I have personally been around people and heard them talking about Jewish synagogues or Jewish community centers, schools, places where Jews gather. And my remembrance was that they hated those places, these buildings. They hated the buildings, not even the people, but the buildings so much that they wanted to vandalize them. They wanted to, destroy them, whatever they wanted to do, because they wanted to hurt the Jewish people so much. And some of the synagogues are beautiful. They're great pieces of architecture. As an architecture major, I appreciate all that went into creating that. And you want to destroy that just because you hate the people that is associated with that? See, that's the type of thinking that just messes up quality of life for not only the people that it's going out to, but they're screwing up their own selves. Hatred of that magnitude is generational. It's being passed down. The kids are watching you, and it's being taught to them. And then they go out and spread, propaganda and hatred, and their kids are watching them. And we have to start the conversation moving the needle in the right path. So, final thoughts on this topic. I'm going to ask those of you that may want to put in a final word. This will be your opportunity. I know Dan has has something to close us out with, but I'm going to ask any of the other panelists, if you have anything, please jump in. Amy, yes.
Go ahead, Charlie. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would just say, for any members of groups that don't regularly experience hatred or prejudice like this, the work falls more on those shoulders than on the groups that do experience hatred. If we're talking about bridging gaps or something like that, like the people causing the problem are the ones that really should be doing the heaviest lifting to fix it. And I think a great point of self-reflection is to ask yourself, what makes you feel you are justifiably so entitled that if your life is somehow imperfect, you have to turn to something like ridiculous conspiracy theories in order to find an enemy, in order to make it somebody else's fault, that the weight of your supposed unhappiness or problems should fall on the shoulders of another person. Just ask yourself that and think about it. And hopefully that can open your eyes a little bit to just how ridiculous a fallacy that is. So that's the final thought that I would like to throw out there. But I talked over you, Charlie. I apologize.
Charlie, yes.
What was I going to say? I have to admit, I feel very cynical about this subject, that we certainly want to bring a message of hope out here. But I always tend to think in terms of human nature, and this is probably true of some other subjects we've had in this show, that there is a certain group of people who will create, as I mentioned, a stereotype, if you will, or look at a certain a group of people in a certain way. And yes, it goes from generation to generation. And there are numerous reasons for that. It can go from education, environment, and so forth. There's a part of me that thinks that will always perpetuate in some form, hopefully a minority, which I believe a minority of the population, which is, all we can do is try to do the best we can to convince that group of people on that. I don't know what the magic formula is on that. My personal experience, I've been lucky enough to, as an actor, I've been in the Diary of Anne Frank. I played Otto Frank. So I've gone through that, which was quite an experience. And I have friends who are Jewish. I live in a community that is partially Jewish. And, my wife's closest friend is Jewish. And